Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's CDCT live session on modern IT operations. I'm Jason Rader, and I'll be your host today. And along with me for the ride, we've got Sri Vasudevan, who's our practice director for modern IT operations here at Insight CDCT, and Juan Orlandini, who's our chief architect. Thanks for being with me, gentlemen.
Thank you, Jason. Good to be here.
Thank you.
So we'd like to, we've had several sessions that mentions modern IT ops. We talked about the modern edge the last time, Juan. But I always like for the folks who are just tuning in for the first time, and thank you very much, to kind of restate where we are so we can kind of go forth in the journey. And I think this is a great foundational conversation we want to have related to modern IT ops. So if you're out there and you don't think this is a good topic for you, keep listening because we're going to fill you in. Who wants to take a stab at defining what we're talking about when we say modern IT operations?
I'll take the first stab, and then I'm sure Sri will add a lot of color on top.
Sri will fix it. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, correct. So modern IT operations, and we shorten it inside of Insight to ModOps. So you might hear us refer to it as ModOps, modern IT ops. It's the same concept. And in short, what it is a operating model that bridges the gap between IT and the developer. If you look at how public cloud is developed by the public cloud providers and who they target as the end user, it isn't really an IT consumer. It's actually a developer. And by extension, they're reaching into the line of business. And that's really what modern IT operations is really extending itself to become, is a developer-friendly IT team that understands how to provide the types of services that developers need in order to accelerate the digital transformation that our clients are trying to achieve through those developer teams and support of the lines of business that are trying to have digital dexterity and address all the different needs that they are bringing to the market. Did I capture that right, Sri?
Yeah, so to add to a couple of things, typically IT shared services, were offered in competencies or pillars of expertise. So there would be network managers, there would be other server compute managers, there would be storage managers, etc. Those things were trying to be bridged and becoming a collaboration with the developers who need services quickly and consume it quickly so that they can go to market quicker. So one of the key things that modern IT ops hopes to accomplish and is trying to accomplish is the fact that all infrastructure is being provided as a service that is consumed by the developers. So they can consume whatever they need at whatever point in their development programs. And the second part of it is a lot of the IT operations, governance, security was typically bolted on and then added on to a production workload and not being driven during that development of the workload process. And that's the second part of it. So the modern IT ops paradigm tries to provide those services quicker in the development cycle.
And to add to that, piggybacking on that one, when we talk about services, it's really API-driven services, which is really what developers want to consume, right? They don't want to open up a ticket to request a virtual machine to be created for them, or to have a database created for them, or even a table within a they don't want to do that. They want to have a programmatic interface so they can develop to those needs and have the infrastructure be handled. I almost jokingly say there's a developer, there's an API, and then you have to have magic that happens, right? And that's what modern IT ops really helps create, is the foundational elements from the IT perspective so that the developer has that experience. And that's what they have in the public cloud. And increasingly, our clients want to offer to them, regardless of where the consumption happens, whether the developer wants to consume it from a public cloud, which is perfectly okay, in a hybrid cloud model where you have workloads that span locations, or even in a wholly public environment. The developer wants to have that similar kind of an experience, regardless of what it is. So API first, I say developer forward. I'm a foodie, so when I say developer forward, I mean it in the foodie sense, right? In the foodie sense, when you say it's garlic forward, that's the first thing that you taste when you eat something that's got a lot of garlic in it, or pepper, or vanilla, or whatever it is. That's what developers want, is a developer forward IT infrastructure, and through that provide that. But with the context that Sri provided, which is, hey, you have to have security baked in from the very get-go, right? You have to have the resiliency, the availability, the recoverability, all of those things that IT traditionally has done, built right into that experience that's coming out of IT.
Fantastic. And I think we may have had a slight glitch on start, so I just want to kind of restate what we're talking about here. So modern IT operations, we just went with the definition. It sounds like from Juan's perspective, it means you taste the developer first, I guess. Sorry, that was my foodie joke. And for those of you who are just tuning in, I apologize for that one as well. So as we move forward on this modern IT operations and what you guys just said, how did we kind of get here? Because you kind of said what it is. How did we arrive at this particular point?
Well, it's a historical evolution. All right. If you look at how IT grew up 50, 60 years ago, in the beginning, there was the mainframe, right? And in the mainframe world, a very expensive resource was the mainframe itself. So you built a set of practices and policies around maintaining this very expensive resource and making sure that it was consumed as efficiently as possible. A lot of the legacy IT cruft is built around that model, all right? And over time, though, there's this paradigm shifts that have happened in our industry. So it happened when the mini computer came around, and all of a sudden IT wasn't controlling that, but the developers saw that they could go and build these amazing things. So think about Unix. It was built on the back of minis. It was literally a box that was sitting in a closet that these really smart guys said, oh, I think I can do better on that. And then the same thing happened. And by the way, once it was built, IT put their arms around that, and it was great. And then the same thing happened with micros, computers, right? The PCs. And then it became distributed systems. And then now it's the containerized world, and it's going to be the serverless world. And in fact, the public cloud is something very similar to that. The original public cloud offerings were aimed for and shot directly at the developers. And developers said, oh, I can swipe a credit card, go develop my app, and the business need is satisfied, and off I go, right? IT is now putting their arms around that. And where we see a lot of inefficiencies in the system is not by ill intent. It's just because the IT practices are not built around that. And that's what we're talking about. So how do we build IT practices around that? So, and not to put controls on the system to prevent things from happening, but to put practices in control so that you can prevent bad, nefarious things to happen, right? And cost controls and governance and security and all those other things that IT traditionally has built. So that's how we got here. But along the way, we also have to remember that traditional IT systems still continue to exist. So mainframes are around, and they will not go away. I don't care what anybody says, the mainframe's not going away. Minis are still around, so the big legacy Iron Unix boxes are still around. We run into those every day at our clients. The Linux and Unix and virtual machine environments that we're all used to, they're still around and will be around for a very long time. So you have to have some sort of a mechanism that helps you bridge all of those while providing you the access and the programmatic way of moving into the future.
So one of the
kind of grew
interesting
apart
things is that
along the journey. Sorry, Sri.
So one of the interesting things is that everybody's always trying to provision resources, infrastructure, services quicker and quicker. But as this evolution happened, a lot of focus was on let's provision compute resources quicker, but then the others were left behind, such as security or such as the ability to monitor, observe your development systems in the process. But as the evolution happened, the entire ecosystem of the infrastructure services became a whole. So now you can programmatically deploy, say, security policies while you're developing your application workloads. So it doesn't have to be a separate process, or you can integrate networking and networking designs and requirements into that process. So this evolution has gone towards the point where all of those things have to come together. Every infrastructure component, every infrastructure service, and policies that go along with it are now a whole, and they're provided to the developer at the time of the development lifecycle and not at a later date or based on some predefined, sizing or architecture requirements.
Yeah, so let me add something to that ties very, very closely to that, and that's this starts sounding a lot like DevOps as we're explaining this, all right? And it is not that it's not DevOps, but it's also not that it is DevOps. This works as a enabling foundational element, so you can build a DevOps practice on top of it, all right? So think about how it happened in the public cloud. The public cloud has some assumed capabilities that are delivered as part of the services. So the systems are available, they're plugged into the network is being monitored, all those things. And typically that's just part of the service that you consume. You swipe a credit card and here you go, here's the stuff. Now it's up to you to define how you use that stuff, but the stuff is there and it's running and it's being monitored, right? And monitored is a very loose term because you have to be very careful what you assume is being monitored and is not. But there's a substrate that got built by the public clouds that is being consumed in a malleable way by the developers. Modern IT really wasn't built that way. It was built to what Sri had mentioned, which is you had these silos of capabilities, and then you had to, as a developer, request a network thing, and then a VM thing, and a storage thing, and this other thing. And we actually, as an industry, tried to create private clouds by automating the provisioning of those siloed elements. And that actually turned out to be terrible because what we did is we automated the crap, sorry for the language, out of a poor architecture. So what we got is the ability to automatically, programmatically develop faster, crappy things. All right. And what we're talking about is let's rethink that. Let's rethink this so that if I want to consume thing, I'm getting something that the developer can consume, a fully fledged out CI/CD pipeline. That would be awesome. Swipe an internal credit card. Now here's your pipeline. Go off and develop and go be happy. Don't worry about whether it's running on VMware or if it's running in the public cloud or if it's running as a container. You as a developer really ultimately don't care. You just want to get to the point where you can write the code that delivers the value to the business. And that's what we're enabling.
And so when we say the whole shift left mentality, how does it apply to this?
Well, this is exactly it, all right? So by applying modern IT operations principles, what you're doing is creating the systems that allow all of that stuff to shift left. And shift left, it means that it's getting closer and closer to the developer. The developer has his intent or she has the intent defined in code. It says, hey, I need a network, it needs this kind of connectivity, it needs a load balancer, it needs this, it needs that, whatever it is that they need in order to service their application. And then that's closer to them than saying, hey, open up a ticket and whatever, right? It gives them closer. Tied into that is the observability that you need in order to make sure that those things are working as you want. So there's the APM side of the house, so an application performance monitoring, as well as the infrastructure monitoring that needs to be tied. And you bring that closer to the developer so they can actually see, hey, I'm building my code and it's performing or not performing. It is failing or not failing, and this is where it's failing. And all that gets us exposed to the layers of IT that go and enable that, but in a transparent, repeatable fashion to them.
So one of the critical things and phrases that are used is during the development lifecycle, there are certain stages that developers go through, whether it's a build stage or a testing stage or deployment stage, delivery stage, and move it into production. And typically what one was talking about, even in terms of observability or security paradigms, they were either in some phases or really at the end, and it still happens where security is an afterthought, and developers have not been apprised of what vulnerabilities they might be introducing in their code or in the infrastructure itself that's being delivered, right? So the concept of shifting the feedback loops closer and closer to each stage of this development lifecycle is one of the critical points that the modern IT ops fundamentally tries to address, right? So you get your security principles applied at the build stage itself so that you don't have to wait till the end to find out that I have to redevelop certain code sets to fix those issues. So that's a very critical item, and I think one of the most important items in the concept of DevOps and fail fast and all those things is the shortening of the feedback loops so that developers have information at every stage quicker and faster.
And there's an abstraction that ends up happening, right? So developers are experts in developing whatever that they are charged with developing. Most of them are not security experts. They might have security principles baked into how they write the code, but they're probably not network security experts and probably not data protection experts, which is an aspect of security. There's all these other things that go onto the security model that if you bake in and it's abstracted so that when you ask for a service, it's included as part of the service, that really bakes in a layer on top of which they can add their expertise without having to worry about the PhD's level of architecture that you've already done for them, right? And that's critically important because this stuff is so hard, so complicated, so many layers. It's the more we can abstract away from the developer, the better it is, and the more likely we are to have a verifiable security stance versus something that is has to be tested and verified independent of it. And Jason, this is your field. You know this better than anybody else. You come in sideways at it, it's much harder than if it's baked in from the get-go.
Yeah, and that was what I was kind of driving at from the shift left kind of perspective. I mean, when I think left, I'm thinking all the way to the requirements phase, right? And I think once you've defined those requirements and security is part of that. So like you said, Juan, it's very complicated. We don't need the developer to know all of these pieces, but they need to be part of the requirements, and then we can figure that out. So from a theory perspective, it's getting everybody's requirements on the security side, on the networking side, all of these things defined up front, or the closer that you can get to that. And then with the tools and the overall program that you've got put in place, it creates that opportunity to modernize and automate these things.
And the consumption becomes continuous throughout the process. So it's not, staged or in phases. It is continuous.
Well, the nice thing that I like about it being programmatic like that, by programmatic mean that it's defined in code, is that if there's a change in the threat landscape, you can actually redefine how your systems are built to support that. And then that automatically gets inherited by the programmatic thing. So it's a matter of redeploy, not recode, which is a huge, huge time saver and a much better security stance.
No, totally agree. So we kind of talked about, where we came from, where we kind of are now, but in the lives that we've all led going into an organization and talking about, all you simply have to do is understand the requirements and then you can move forward. Why is that such a block for folks?
Well, there's a huge cultural shift that you have to do in order to do this, right? And that's really the number one thing to understand, is that this is as much a cultural shift as it is a technology shift. It's probably more cultural than it is technology. You have to break down barriers. You have to break down decades of history and systems and training and all sorts of things. I mean, it could be as simple as retraining some of your staff to go from using a mouse and a pointer to configure networks, to defining that as a YAML file where you're actually programmatically delivering that. And that's a big mental burden for a lot of organizations, and breaking down the barriers for that. And as we work with our clients through this, one of the things that we've identified is that there's really some competencies that you have to focus on that help you break down those barriers. And Sri's done a fantastic job of mapping out what those competencies are. And we're very, very careful not to call them pillars or facets, because they're all integrated deeply together, right? And so if you go and deploy infrastructure as code, that probably means you need to have the security guys associated with it, so that you need to have competency in some automation. You need to have some competency in the NetSecOps, right? And you have to have some competency in the security side, and maybe even some of the platform stuff. So maybe, Sri, you can go through the competencies so that we can talk about how these all integrate directly.
Yeah, I think before that, I wanted to share some of the difficulties clients have, or challenges that they have during this process, right? So enterprises still have monolithic applications and legacy infrastructure, so they need to balance, running those or operating those while they're doing this transformation. That is, easier said than done. Monolithic apps that are built, organically over a period of years takes a little bit of time. And when you try to migrate those and transform those, you introduce other challenges that you have to, assess and solve. So that's complex. The siloed concept or culture that is, a lot of clients are trying to fix it. It's still a process and needs to be continuously addressed. And then as you go towards more modern ways of delivering apps or modern ways of delivering infrastructure or modern platforms, you introduce other complexities. So infrastructure as code makes it easy to consume infrastructure, but it introduces security issues or concerns that you need to be constantly aware of. Or there's violation of, people not using the right process to deliver their infrastructure, even though you have gone towards automation, causes you to have configuration drift that you have to constantly monitor and have a policies posture. So you need to think about different types of policies that, address those issues. You're delivering software in a more continuous manner with CI/CD pipelines, et cetera, but now you have to be concerned about, operations and security within that process. So there's a lot of things to address. It's not just saying, oh, we're going to just modernize and, everything will be fine. So we still have to take a step-by-step approach. Now, in terms of attempting to solve those, we think about in some competencies and categories that you have to fix. So we talked about how infrastructure and services is a whole. So you have to think about infrastructure as code and how do you integrate dev NetOps into it. Think about networks and security and provision them along with just your basic infrastructure components, right? So infrastructure as code, programmable networks, security and DevOps, all those things are, what we are considering as part of this. And then underneath, you still have to modernize your platforms that host these modern applications and you deliver them in a modern way. So you have to do those. And finally, you have to introduce observability and resilience and, service management concepts in the DevOps world. So you can, continue to run service management like you used to. The changes are fast and often, and you can have, gated items to do things like change management, or incident responses have to be integrated with your infrastructure as code processes. So they're all, they function as one. So those are some of the areas that we think about when you try to solve these issues.
So let me touch on the thread that you picked there, and that's the infrastructure. What is infrastructure, right? And for us at Insight, we have a little bit of a loose definition of what infrastructure is, because it includes everything that you would typically see from an IT shop as infrastructure. So your compute, your storage, your networking, your virtualization, your data protection, all of those elements that go into that. But those have to be sourced or modernized to a platform that is API first, API driven, that can be amenable to a lot of these optimizations that we've been talking about. And not all providers are the same in all of this. And there's a lot of noise on top of that, all right? And then there's another layer of infrastructure that you can put on top of that stuff, which is, so to us, a Kubernetes engine, whether it's one provided by the public cloud providers, and they all have one, right? Or I should say containerized framework, or one that's provided by an on-premises provider. There's multiples of those available as well. That's infrastructure. If you really look at it, a developer doesn't see Kubernetes as a solution. They see that as infrastructure on top of which they write their code. They want to consume Kubernetes. They don't want to run Kubernetes. So you got to make sure that when you're looking at this stuff, you are taking a look at all of these layers of infrastructure and addressing all of those needs. And you modernize all of them so that you can support them. You don't have to do it all at the same time, but you do have to make sure that they all do get modernized to support this capability.
So let me throw this out. Is there a possibility that all this stuff is a fad? I mean, are we going to be going back? I know the answer, but I want to entertain the looks of disgust on you guys' faces.
It's not disgust. Chances are very high that this is going to stick around to one degree or another. All right, is it going to look different in the future? Guaranteed. All right, guarantee that we are going to find something, another abstraction layer, a different model of approaching that is going to be evolved into. All right. The good news about what we do for a living is that this will be around forever. Right. I'll tell you that it's no different than saying that the mainframe is dead. It's not going to go die, right? Monolithic apps are dead. No, they're not. And in fact, many apps should remain monolithic. And knee-jerk reaction to containerize them is probably wrong. You need to take a look at it. Containerized applications that are microservices based and use all the new cool technologies, they'll be around, but they'll be supplanted or augmented by something else down the road for sure. All right, so yeah, this isn't going to be a fad. Is it going to evolve? Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, the concept of that cultural shift will still be the same. I think the tech potentially could change. Sorry, Sri.
Now I was going to say, everything as a service and everything as a code is here to stay. That's the way the going forward. That's how we're going to deliver all these services, right? But like Juan said, even if some of the other monolithic and legacy ways of delivering IT services stays, even those process architectures have to be modernized. It's not just the infrastructure or infrastructure delivery, it's the entire process architecture, whether it's, like I mentioned, service management or things like those. They also have to be modernized, even if you're supporting your legacy frameworks.
Yeah. I can't think of a single reference point of where somebody who's leaned into this has had any bad effects. I mean, there's definitely the effort to change the culture and obviously all the things that we talked about, but because sometimes people say, oh, I'm going to wait and see, those early adopters are going to test, figure out all the problems. But I think in every other place that I've seen it, it seems like the early adopters who've actually fully adopted and gone through the cultural change and the adoption overall and making these compartmentalized pieces of their organization work together have seemed to have come out of it pretty well.
There's actually an interesting thing. From a technology perspective, you're absolutely right. What we see clients struggling with the most is how to change some of the culture outside of IT and outside even the developer organization, all right? Because to do a lot of these transformations, you're moving the value proposition away from IT and into the business. And what you have to showcase back to the business is what's the value to the business. And showing that value, improving that value to the business has become actually the harder thing to do, because sometimes you don't know what the metrics for success are, right? If it's an internal thing, how do you show back to the business, hey, this thing has improved this so much better? If it's an external facing thing where it's a product that you're delivering to an external facing audience, that's relatively easy to say, hey, I'm selling 10x what I sold before, or this is a new line of revenue that we didn't have before. Look, it's worth investing. Internal investments, internal products are much harder to demonstrate value against sometimes. And that's where we see more of a challenge and more struggles than the technology itself being true or not valid.
I say that a lot about security. It's kind of in the same vein. It's hard if you haven't been in the habit of linking security to how it enables the business and communicating that way from a security perspective. The business doesn't think about it that way, and it'd be the same from the infrastructure folks and the IT operations folks have to think about it in that manner as well, because the way that they communicate that, even with the cultural change, is going to help them and understand their value back to the organization, and the organization understand them.
That's exactly right.
And the cycle will continue, right? Business transformations or business process transformations drive digital transformations, drives IT transformation, but it goes hand in hand, and all three of them work together to make it successful.
Yeah, I wouldn't have thought we'd be having organizational change management folks on our team as we walked in, a couple of years ago. But now that is a very big part of the way that we operate with our clients. So
it's a huge part, and we have a huge organization that's all that they do, because this is such a challenge for so many of our clients. So yeah, it's a big and important part.
And even in the journey up to now, I think one of the things has positively and forever changed, in my opinion, is the fact that every initiative in the IT world these days requires cross-functional teams, and the start. It has started that everybody's accepted the fact, and they're getting closer and closer. So,
well, it is. It's that shift from a project-based mentality to a product-based mentality. If you do it correctly, right? You do have these cross-functional teams where you have the line of business owners that are the ones that create the backlog, and then the technology deliverers, whether it's development or operations or whatever it is, that really address that backlog and build to it. But it's the product owners that then showcase to the business, which are full participants. Hey, yeah, we've met your backlog because you've done this for the business. We understand, we prioritize, we've developed to it, and whatever it is. So it's that full-on product mentality shift is really what's helping a lot of our clients do that.
And just to say as a final word, this is a maturity curve like anything else. There are clients who are trying to accomplish a fewer things at the beginning of this journey. There are clients who are, a little bit more advanced, and each and every type of client or customer or consumer has a different jump point on this process, and identifying what that is for themselves is also a critical part of this process.
Perfect. No, I think, and that's our goal, for those of you guys out there. I mean, we want to bring, this is complex. There's a lot of different skill sets involved. And, that's why we try to bring the thought leaders together on these kinds of sessions to talk about the different angles that it takes to be able to accomplish this. But I love the whole maturity aspect. And even on any maturity model, when you get to the end of it, it's still managed and optimizing. I mean, you're never done. It's always going to continue. And sometimes that's going to be optimizing the processes or the skill sets, but it's also going to be the technology as well. So, and that's an ongoing journey that, again, we try to bring the right folks to be able to have these conversations with you. Any final words, gentlemen?
Oh, as usual, I can't believe we've already talked 31 minutes on this. Yeah, there's a lot more. We've actually done a number of similar events that are available for watching in the past, where we dive a little bit deeper into different categories. So I'd encourage the audience, if you haven't had a chance to sit in through any of this stuff, that sit in on that. And we have a wealth of material that's on our website. I'm sure that, Jason, you'll wrap up with a link to that, where we have lots and lots of collateral. And if you want to have further or deeper conversations, there's a huge team here that this is what we do for a living, and here to help ease the transition to this as much as possible.
For sure.
Exciting times and a lot of transformation and opportunities to transform in the coming days and months and years.
No, agreed. And by the way, we do pay a lot of attention to your comments and the survey questions that go out. So if you guys would like a specific nuance of this covered, we'd be more than happy to come back on and bring more people if we need, and get right to that. So we definitely pay a lot of attention to your comments, and please keep on commenting. And related to what Juan said earlier, insightcdct.com has loads of materials there. Feel free to reach out to any of us individually, and we thank you guys for your time today. Thanks, gentlemen.
Thank you, Jason. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you, Sri.
Cheers.